I suppose the problem is you have to define what an era is and at what point does it end. It's the end of an era in the sense that Luis Enrique is going, so in that sense it's an end of an era anyway. It's the end of an era in the sense that this has been, I think, the confirmation of something we've been seeing all season, which is a Barcelona side that, in fact, that goes back beyond just this season, that doesn't have the same identity that it once had, that isn't rooted in the centre of midfield, it isn't rooted in control and possession in quite the way it once was. It's been focused much more on the front three, and that this season, the extraordinary season, and it really has been an extraordinary season of Messi and indeed the other two forwards, although Suarez has been a bit off of late, has kind of disguised some of those structural flaws, so that could be seen as the end of an era. Obviously, you've also got the fact that at the end of the season, we still haven't seen real progress on the renewal of Messi's contract. Andres Iniesta dropped very, very heavy hints before this game that there's a chance that he doesn't continue at the end of the season. So in that sense, yes, it's the end of an era, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Barcelona now suddenly collapse. I mean, a side that's got that front three and that's got Piqué and Umtiti and Ter Stegen has the makings of a side that can continue to be one of the best in Europe, of course.
Very spirited debate on this subject last night on the show. Dan and Craig getting into it. Where do you stand, Ali? Is this a major turning point for Barcelona?
They have to make decisions in terms of personnel because it's a team that is flawed. And when you look at the results that they've had in Champions League, when have you seen a Barcelona team getting destroyed 4-0 like they were against PSG, or 3-0 against Juventus, or unable to score in 2 consecutive games against Juventus? The magical game that they had against PSG disguised some of these flaws, and people thought, well, there is something special about this group. There is something that they can turn it on, and they're going to be able to run through this Champions League. They'll show you that in the first half, as they did against Sevilla, when the front three were running all over the place, and you thought, man, if they play like this team cannot be stopped. Here's the thing. That doesn't cover up the structural flaws that Sid is talking about, the midfield that does not control the games. We've known Barcelona to control the pace of a game with the possession of the ball and possession in advanced positions. They can no longer do that with consistency because they play really only on the left-hand side of the field. They ignore the right-hand side of the field because, by the way, Dani Alves is not down that side. Sergio Roberto is not an option down that side. So everything they do funnels to that left-hand side, and eventually they run out of space, they run out of possession, they run out of chances, and if Messi, Suarez, or Neymar doesn't do anything special, this team is not advancing forward.
There is an argument out there, Stevie, that Barcelona are simply too big now, too rich, too powerful to have a downturn for very long. Oh, and by the way, they still have Lionel Messi.
I'm not so sure. Listen, I think the word the guys were arguing about was decline. And there's no question they're in decline. You can't go from being the team that everybody's shooting for to be to where they are right now. There's no question they are not the best team in Europe by some way. And regardless of the amount of money they have, they've tried to spend money, particularly in the middle of the field. They've tried to bring in Turan. They've signed Gomez. They just have not been able to replace the quality they had. Busquets, Iniesta and Xavi, when they were at the pomp, they haven't replaced it. And when you don't replace that, you cannot expect to stay where they were.
So it's the end of a cycle. You lose the coach is gone. I think that was most certainly a disruptive influence on this group. But to Stevie's point, I agree. It's about the recruitment of the players that are going to let Iniesta have a little rest now and again so he can keep his leg fresh. And Busquets, Rakitic, and on. So that's the next issue for this Barcelona side. Yes, they've got the nuances of still a very, very good team, but it's the players that are going to come in the summer that is going to define the next cycle.
And Sid, they've regenerated, haven't they? They've been the end of previous cycles in recent history. You think of when Pep Guardiola left, of when Samuel Eto'o and Ronaldinho left. Those downturns weren't for very long. However, you go back to the Dream Team and Johan Cruyff, and there was a downturn for 7-8 years after that. What are we looking at here, do you think?
Well, I think that filters into an important point, which is that Ali was talking there about that they need a renewal of personnel, that they need to get new people on board. I think there's something perhaps a little bit deeper, and I don't want to kind of talk in nebulous terms or try and make this something big and airy, but fundamentally they lack an idea now. They lack the clarity of identity that they've had, a philosophy, if you want to use that word, that they've had in recent years. And Luis Enrique, even when they won the treble, there was a slight hint of that. There was a hint that they weren't quite they didn't have the same identity as before. The question mark, of course, is can you have that same identity without Xavi? Can you have that same identity with an Andres Iniesta who's physically perhaps declining and you can't find necessarily the replacements for that? But I think they've managed the recruitment very, very poorly. I think they've managed some of the institutional evolution very poorly. And I think fundamentally that comes down to perhaps a slight lack of ideas. And the reason why I say that's made more pertinent by your point about the long decline after the Johan Cruyff era was because they changed ideas. They lost direction as a club. It wasn't just that, right, some of these players got old and moved on. It wasn't just that that Cruyff fell out with the board and moved on. It was that they went into a period of not being sure what it was they were trying to achieve. Now, some of their ideas were maintained. At youth level, for example, the structural ideas that were taught throughout the youth system were more or less maintained and more or less intact. But at first team level and at institutional level, they were somewhat chaotic, and I think that's really where this sits now. That Barcelona need to get an identity back and be very, very clear about what they do, and from there build according to that idea. But I think they are too big to be a disastrous team because they've got really good players, but maybe not the very, very top. Bear in mind, this isn't a one-off. The last 4 years, 3 of those 4 years, they've been knocked out in the Champions League quarterfinals. Now, it's no disgrace to reach a Champions League quarterfinal, but for a team like Barcelona, it is stopping considerably short of where they believe they should be.